Welcome to the second part of the Internal Controls 101 video series. If you haven't already, please be sure to check out the first part of the series, Controls Basics, which can be found on the ReliabilityFirst website. My name is Courtney Fasca, and welcome to this session on the Internal Controls Framework. Now that we've talked about the basics of an internal control in the first session, it's time we discuss how we prioritize, list, and use our controls. As we learned in the basics class, often you need layers of controls to really address the whole of a risk, like someone breaking into your house, and the sustainability mindset to ensure you don't go too overboard. But how do you keep track of all these controls, make sure you've addressed all the risk aspects, and how do you keep track of your blend of controls? Well, there are a few ideas out there on how to do all this, different internal control frameworks. And while there are several different frameworks you can use, and each has its own merits, what we'll go over today as an example is called the COSO framework, which is also in the GAO Green book. And then we'll go over an example using the COSO framework. As you've heard, internal controls can take many forms. They can be corrective, preventative, detective, automated versus procedural, primary versus secondary controls, enterprise-wide versus activity-level controls. And all this can get quite confusing and difficult to track. There are so many types of controls. But to get your myriad controls to work together, blend together, and have an overall internal controls program, you can use an internal controls framework. You may have heard of this before. This is part of the COSO internal controls framework, commonly referred to as the COSO cube. To organize your controls, to ensure your controls have a good foundation and are fleshed out, you can use this cube. When thinking about your overall internal controls program, think about these 5 components. The control environment. Think of this as the oversight and authority piece. A good control scheme empowers their staff to use the controls and create them as needed. You don't want to just make a bunch of controls, but no one bothers to use them. Then we have the risk assessment. You need to figure out what risks you have before you go addressing and prioritizing them. You don't want to spend millions of dollars on a really cool AI that is able to spot phishing emails 100% of the time, while your employees are all using default, easily guessable passwords for years. You need to know your risks so you can recognize what controls you need. And this isn't a one and done. As we know, not only are you potentially changing year to year, but threats are constantly evolving, and you'll need to reevaluate your risk assessment accordingly. Which brings us to control activities. These are the controls you use, along with the documentation of them. You'll need procedures, process owners, verification checks. You want to make sure your controls are known and are tracked. And speaking of making sure they are known, another key component is the information and communication of your controls. Are you using relevant information, aggregating information from multiple business units? Maybe creating tracking dashboards and metrics? Are you using internal and external data, reaching out to others to see what they're doing and how to actively improve your own controls? And finally, monitoring activities. Rather than just waiting for the auditors to come and tell you what's working and what's not, review, test, verify, and improve your controls periodically. Are your controls designed well if something has changed? Are they operating as expected and fully implemented? Is there a better way? And as a friendly reminder, ReliabilityFirst has the Assist Visit program, where we can answer questions and work with you for free. Okay, that was a lot. And maybe that seemed really abstract. And since you're asking, we'll go over some examples of what I mean by each of those 5 components. Here Here you'll see a short, but not exhaustive, list of some of the examples of what internal controls can look like under those 5 components we've been talking about from the cube thing. Up first, we have the control environment, the structure, the tone from the top. This could be a swim lane chart, and you can see an example of one here on the right. You can track different phases of a process, noting the different handoffs and touch points with different business units, which you can see in the rows on the left, and different decision points, which you can see in the flow diagram. This chart is useful for visualizing multi-phase or multi-departmental processes and procedures, and filling one out can help you identify potential places where communication could break down, or how many times something changes hands, or help you realize how long the overall process really could take and help you identify bottlenecks. Also under control environment, you can set expectations and add structure through periodic meetings, creating site-specific procedures with annual reviews. Even your change management process can set the tone. Moving over to risk assessment. That's the actual creation and maintenance of your risk. You may use a third-party management system, or maybe a SharePoint work tracker is more your speed. Perhaps you use an in-house internal dashboard with automatic built-in triggers. Or maybe you have operating procedures with various pre-studied scenarios. Control activities. This could look like a big database outfitted with access controls, or the Excel spreadsheets that you use, or the periodic walkdowns you perform. It could also be a workflow tracker or ticketing system with tracked sign-offs. Information and communication. Remember, we're really looking for planned communication, not just reactive. Are you talking externally, looking for better and best practices and lessons learned? Are you doing deficiency training, looking to improve your controls? And finally, the 5th component, monitoring activities. This could look like periodic meetings with all the involved business units. Maybe you hold enterprise-wide or General Human Performance Initiative, HPI, type meetings. Also, purposefully following up on everything, anything from your HPI calls, for example, to ensure mitigation completion and adequacy. Or, as I like to call this one, don't just find a problem, fix a problem. And finally, this could be something as simple as performing your own internal or third-party led audits. The idea here is to be more proactive than just waiting for the RF engagement team to come and tell you what's working and what's not working. So we have some ideas, but how does that really come together into something cohesive that makes sense? Let's break it down with an example, piece by piece. First, let's pick a risk we're looking to address. Rather than just focusing on being compliant, which is still important, what we're concentrating on is using a blend of controls to create a process. We're trying to make sure everything gets done every time sustainably. For today, we're going to pick EOP 5-3R3. Now, I'll readily admit I don't have these memorized, so let's first refresh our memory on what EOP 5R3 says. If you're not into operations and planning standards, don't click off this video just yet. While we are picking a standard and requirement, this example can be leveraged in a lot of other standards. I won't read it to you, but basically this requirement says that each transmission operator has to review and submit their restoration plan annually. Seems simple enough, right? And remember, even if you're not in operations and planning, and if you're not a TOP, you can use what we're doing in any standard and requirement with a time-based periodic submittal. Okay, I hope you're still with me. So let's say we are compliant with this standard. We always annually submit the restoration plan to the Reliability Coordinator, RC, and we have the evidence to prove that. But while we are compliant, which is good, we want to be reassured that we will continue to be compliant. So we're looking at internal controls. How does the TOP make sure this is definitely going to happen in time, every time? Let's break it down. Remember, we have the first COSO component, the control environment, the tone at the top piece. First, we're going to establish the authority. We're going to say this first piece is a company-wide expectation that comes from the top that we are committed to continuous improvement and ideas. We'll encourage ideas from everyone, all levels, with an incentive to really emphasize that we're serious about it. Okay, that first piece was a big abstract one, but the control environment also sets up the structure and can be more down to earth. So like one of our examples mentioned, let's start with creating a swim lane diagram. That should help us know what steps we have. I'll put one up on the slide for reference. Risk assessment. What are the risks? Let's keep it simple. We need to make sure the restoration plan is updated. The risk of not reviewing and submitting on a timely basis is that we and the RC could have outdated plans that may not be accurate. Okay, if we know the risk, what will we do to ensure we mitigate that risk? What control activities will we use? Again, keeping it simple, let's say we'll delegate the workflow to a compliance person, someone who will keep track of when the restoration plan submittal is coming up. Let's say his name is Craig in Compliance, and he puts a calendar reminder for a month before the restoration plan is due. And we'll use the same person to send the final email to the RC with the plan in it. We'll start and end with the same person. And for another activity, let's say we have the operations department team review and update the plan. Simple enough. So, information and communication. Well, once the operations department gets the heads up from Craig, they'll have to work on reviewing and updating the plan. If you recall, the information and communication should be deliberate and planned. For our plan, let's say the operations staff have scheduled meetings with meeting agendas every week until they finish their review. Okay, we're going to jump real quick over to the monitoring activity pieces. I promise we'll get back to the other information piece, but we want to think about checking the work of the operations team reviewing the plan. And a good way to monitor this is to have an independent third-party review and final check. In our plan, let's say we have a required management sign-off. Now, let's say the manager does not sign off. Maybe they spotted an error. For our last information and communication piece, let's have a scheduled daily revision meeting to work on fixing the error until management is good to sign off on it. And for our final monitoring activity, as we talked about in the beginning with the control activity, let's have that one contact who tracks the need to review the plan be the same person who submits the plan, everything coming full circle. For our final monitoring piece, let's have Craig in Compliance send that email to the RC, asking for acknowledgement of receipt, and use the read receipt option, just in case. Now we put it all together. But internal controls are not static, and we should always look for ways to continuously improve. Take a few moments and look at our swim lane. What are your impressions of this restoration plan review and submittal process? What do you think of the control design? Does it have preventative, detective, and corrective controls? Is there a single point of failure? We're going to pretend we underwent an audit and we told the auditors about our internal controls around EOP5R3 using this swim lane chart. And, lucky for us, we even have evidence of our process for the auditors to look at. As you can see in our diagram, we have the calendar reminders that Craig set up in his calendar that we can show the audit team. We also have the email that Craig sent to the operations team, letting them know they need to review the restoration plan. Then We also have the meeting agendas from the operations teams' weekly meetings as they worked on reviewing and revising the restoration plan. And, of course, our restoration plan has the dated manager sign-off of their approval. Now, for this audit, we don't have any evidence of the operations team meeting daily for further revisions. Finally, we have the email sent by Craig in compliance to the reliability coordinator, the one where Craig asks for acknowledgement of receipt, but we also thought ahead and chose the read receipt option when sending the email, so we have that too. After reviewing the evidence, the audit team wants to have a discussion with relevant SMEs. They ask some questions like, other than this swim lane, where is this documented? Is the manager involved in updating the plan beyond just signing off? And these questions give us some good ideas on how to improve. First, we were so excited to jump into our internal controls journey right away and use the COSO framework, but we didn't end up formalizing this process anywhere else other than this swim lane chart. As for the manager, while we originally thought of them as an independent third-party reviewer when we were thinking through our controls, it's fair to say that the manager was involved in the review process and was listed as an attendee in some of the weekly review meetings during the review step. So, not much of an independent reviewer. But we can learn from this and make some changes going forward. Sometime later, we receive word that the fictional audit team has come up with conclusions. And before we read them, just a reminder. Internal controls, whether they're lacking entirely or poorly designed or poorly implemented, does not mean you get a violation or a potential non-compliance. Of course, having poor internal controls can lead to a PNC, like we end up not submitting the restoration plan annually because we didn't have any controls around it, so we violate the standard. But internal controls on their own does not mean an automatic violation. Remember, controls are to help us have a sustainable plan that keeps us compliant now and in the future. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, the audit team gives us the following recommendations. First, as we noted as well, they recommend we have a final independent review of the restoration plan prior to submittal. This makes sense, as someone who wasn't involved in the review phase will look at the plan with fresh eyes and could catch some potential mistakes the others looked over. Second, they recommend the process be officially documented. This is a good idea too. Having it be official will help make sure everyone does it. Lastly, they suggest establishing due date reminders so there is no single point of failure. In their minds, following these recommendations will help ensure that the restoration plan is reviewed and submitted on a timely basis, and in the event that the primary responsible party is unavailable, for example, Craig in compliance wins the lottery, an elimination of a single point of failure. And we will take that back and make further improvements. When we document the process in a procedure, we can add annual reviews to this process procedure, another monitoring piece to make sure we're continuously improving. Maybe we'll leverage that control environment piece we had in the beginning and go to management with the idea that we got some good feedback from the auditors. Maybe we should consider doing our own internal audits. Remember, just because we used ELP5 in our example, that doesn't mean this example is only for this standard. As we said earlier, you can use this knowledge and these suggestions in any standard and requirement with a time-based periodic submittal. Or, in the case of considering doing our own internal audits, that can apply anywhere. But if we take another look at our specific example again, and if we think about this more, we can find more opportunities for improvement. For example, what if the manager does not approve the updated plan? Following the no path, as we see in our diagram, this leads to the operations team going back to revise the plan, meeting daily until they get that approval and sign off. Looking at it now, do we know how long that process could take? If the original review took the team 4 weeks to get completed and over to the manager, who then finds an error that requires another day to be reviewed, could that cause us to be late? Remember, craving compliance is kicking off the process a month before the plan is due. Should there be more checks, more controls? Again, there's always room for improvement. Internal controls are not a one and done. I know that was only one example, but if you're interested in even more real-world examples and going deeper into internal controls, consider attending our internal controls workshop. Just check out the ReliabilityFirst homepage to see when the next one is being held and sign up. You can also check out ReliabilityFirst's tools and services, like the Assist Visit program for technical questions. You can sign up for appraisals, or try out our automated cyber threat and security assessments, or check out other tools we offer. Also, be sure to check on the next video to hear how to get started assessing your own risk at your company. And if you're feeling ready, go ahead and check out the knowledge assessment for the Internal Controls Framework section. Thank you.